Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 79 of DoubleDM. I hope you are having a great day today and are ready to dive into city creation with us today. Yes, this episode is about world building and developing settlements for your TTRPG campaign. We talk at length about many interesting facets that help you understand the world building process easier and simpler. And we give away a lot of advice on the way to understanding how to create a settlement that feels alive, interesting and engaging, because that's what it's all about in the end, creating an engaging settlement so you can elevate your game to the next level. So come on in and join us in chatting about making your TTRPGs better in episode 79, how to create better settlements. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of DoubleDM podcast. We are here to chat about making your TTRPGs better. I am, as always, not alone. Niels, how are you doing today?
I am doing fine. I really can't complain. A bit stressy at work, but overall very good. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing fine as well.
Awesome. Was there anything happening last week for you? Anything major?
Nothing major, I would say. Sure, there were a few TTRPG sessions as every week, but that isn't something I would call necessarily major. I got the grade back for my math exam, which was not passed, but who cares? Yeah, besides that, now I'm free to do whatever the fuck I want. Obviously, I still have to work, but I have a lot of free time again, which will be used to prepare a few one-shots that I have in mind that I want to play over the next few months. That's it. Also preparing, obviously, for my normal campaigns a little bit better. Oh yeah, one thing that could be counted as monumental or interesting or big or whatever you want to call it is that I had a few checkup sessions with my players for our Phantoms of Chaos campaign, because we ended our campaign arc 1 or our chapter 1, whatever you want to call it, and talked about chapter 2. I had singular private discussions with every player, which took about 1 hour or so each, where we talked a little bit about the past, a little bit about the future, a little bit about the present, and just discussed how they are feeling, really. Right? It's because communication is key, obviously. And these checkup sessions, as we talked about already, are very important and can help you very much prepare for your game. Because when I ask my players, for example, what I like to do is I like to do keyword and theme analysis, as I would call them. It's something that we could maybe make an episode about, but generally I ask my players, what would the last chapter be if you put it into 3 words? That can be movie genres, themes, emotions, whatever you want to call it. And my players name different things, right? But that gives me a good idea of what my players roughly think. Obviously, these words can mean a lot of different things. One of them said adventure, for example, and adventure can mean a lot of different things. One of them said dungeons and temples, because the adventure or the chapter was about ancient snake races using dark magic. So all of that kind of works. But then I obviously clarified a bit, but so I know what the words actually mean for them. But it gives me a good idea of when I had to put that chapter out as a book or a movie or a TV series, what would be the tags be? And that is a bit more common ground with my players. We all understand what a mystery series is, but obviously that is a broad term, but it helps us direct it. And the same I asked, for example, for what is the next chapter supposed to be? And they said, again, something like adventure, something a little bit more political, about a lot of drama and interpersonal relationships, or more or less. One of them also said backstory, which for TTRPGs just means he wants part of others or his backstory being more baked into this, because this was the first chapter. I didn't want to take up their backstories just yet. I wanted them to find themselves as a group, because that's one of the things we talked about. They said at the beginning we were a bunch of ragtag groups that stayed together because it was convenient for each one. We all wanted to go to the same place, and we helped each other on the way there. Now we are friends. Now we're a group. Now we can take up helping each other with our personal problems or with problems that come from our past, which are gonna play a role in this. So yeah, I had these checkup sessions and we landed on something. I don't want to do too much because obviously I don't want to spoil my players, but all my players know that when they come back now for our next session into the big city, basically the hub where they can rest, get a little bit of downtime, they will be encountered with something like a thievery, a robbery, or something, a break-in somewhere that will then lead them to the place for the next big adventure. Because they said that while they like the city they are in right now, they also want to get a little bit more, know a little bit more about the present politics and lands around it. So they're gonna be on the road a bit. So I'm gonna let them travel, chase someone, and then be at the part where the actual adventure is supposed to start. And there it's gonna be some political disputes that will spiral into a lot of different fun, engaging tidbits. I already have some ideas that I don't want to say, but there's a lot of cool, interesting stuff there that I think that could be very interesting for my players. And it's also gonna be, there's gonna be a little bit again of dark magics attached because the theme of this whole campaign was dark magics.
Okay, yeah.
As we said with Charlie in the campaign themes episode, always going back to those general themes. The general theme for this campaign was dark magic, and that is gonna be a theme no matter which arc we play. But it's always gonna play a background role for a reason. The players are supposed to figure that reason out in the campaign.
Nice.
So yeah, that's what I did. And yeah, we also recorded Titan's Call. And yeah, I also had a session on Thursday, but wasn't that noteworthy. Not that it was bad, but it was just a normal session.
It is good to have such a session once in a while as well.
And that's good as well. We need that build up. It's important. That's why I cherish these sessions as well. Even though they might not be the most engaging and memorable, they're still a lot of fun to play. Adds a lot of the funny atmosphere that you sometimes just need in TTRPGs, because let's face it, TTRPGs are inherently hilarious.
Oh yeah. Oh, most definitely, yes.
Nils, tell me about you.
Yeah, I had my math exam and I'm still waiting on the grade. So yeah, I'm a bit nervous about that, but I just hope I pass and then I'm done with math. Also, a friend of mine 3D printed me some Dice Masters.
Okay.
So I got some Dice Masters that I want to create some dice molds out of to make some more awesome new dice. Because yes, why not? More dice, more good, or something like this, right?
More dice, more good. Yeah. I don't need more than 30 sets, but I want more than 30.
Exactly. They are shiny math rocks that make click-clack noises. I want them. I need them. So yeah, one of my campaigns is nearing the end of the first chapter as well.
Oh.
Probably in the next 1 or 2 sessions, depending on how long my players take. They're currently in a long-lost, never-found, sunken-in city beneath the desert of the ancient dragon race. Long gone and banished. And yeah, they're in there right now, just at the entrance of this big underground cavern where they now have time to explore. And there will be one of the minor villain at the end of this whole dungeon, you could say. So yeah, I'm interested to see where all of this is going and what they want to do with the information they will get. So yeah, but I don't want to spoil anything more because some players might be listening. So yeah.
How long has that chapter been going on for? Are you also gonna do those checkup sessions after that? How do you plan to proceed the campaign?
I wanted to do these kind of checkup sessions as well to see what they want to focus on next, so I can mold the campaign around it, because I have a rough plan in mind, yes, but all of the how they get there is changeable, as we said so often. And yeah, we've been going on, I think, for 15 or 16 sessions, something like this, where they now traveled somewhere around the country they're in right now to get to know the people, how they live, and a rough political state, but nothing too precise. So just a good baseline to then build on top of for the other chapters, arcs, whatever you want to call it. After that,
as you said, political structure, I kind of flinched a bit because yesterday I had the glorious idea of rebuilding my homebrew worlds, or the one of the countries my players are gonna venture to in what I talked about the next chapter of our campaign is basically a monarchy feudal system modeled after France and the United Kingdom in medieval times.
Oh boy.
I developed a whole separation for this country: duchies, counties, baronies. And I have at least, at the fucking minimum, 720 barons in this country. 720 barons at a minimum in this country.
Oh, damn.
There's gonna be more. Each duke has 4 to 6 counts. Each count has a few viscounts, obviously, or viscounts. And obviously, he has at least 7 barons per county. That's 720 barons at the minimum.
Jesus.
At the minimum.
And everything and every layer on top of that also needs to have. Oh boy.
Obviously, I have the 4 archdukes written down, and I have rough information on all these normal dukes, and then I only know the barons and counts of the area my players are gonna be in, because fuck no, I'm not gonna prepare that. But it's still an interesting task, because seeing how these huge countries were divided, or is divided in this homebrew setting, was interesting to do. So yeah, that's gonna be fun. So I think this episode is already long enough, so we should go ahead and dive into our discussion about creating engaging and interesting cities for your homebrew world. Hey everyone, and welcome to the mid-roll of the show. If you are enjoying the show and content, why not subscribe or follow the show right now on whichever platform you are listening on, so you can stay up to date with all episode releases. Then, next you can search us up on social media at DoubleDM Pod, or click the links in the info box of this episode to find our social media channels and follow us there if you want to stay up to date with all scheduling information and episode announcements. If you follow us on Twitter, you will also get a plethora of social media posts, as I spend way too much time on that platform. But hey, I have funny conversations with people like you and post memes, so that's a great thing. And lastly, if you want to help the show out even further, rate and review us on your platform. A quick 5-star rating or a few sentence review really gives us the feedback we need to improve the show and help other people find our show too. And hey, you can also just tell a friend about the fun you had learning with us and get them to listen in too. Also, we want to say that our show has open advertisement slots for you to book. Just head on over to our Twitter or email address doubledmpod@gmail.com to get into contact with us about getting your content shown on our show. Thank you for listening to this mid-roll, and now back to the show.
And with that, welcome back to the episode. Today we are talking about settlements, right? So, as usual, the first question: what do we define as a settlement? For our discussion's sake.
What do we define as a settlement? Well, a settlement is everything where people live, in my opinion. But obviously, I would make a necessary distinction that it's not where a single person lives. Someone in the woods living on their own is not a settlement per se. A settlement is more a place where people live together, I would say. That can be the smallest of hamlets that you can find to the biggest metropolis you can find. Be it in fantasy style, really just a big village, or a big fantasy city, or a big medieval city with a big castle and ruling class and all of that stuff, or sci-fi biggest metropolis of all time, Night City, right? That type of thing. And they all follow roughly the same guidelines. Obviously not all have the same, depending on magic, technology, people, and a lot of different other things. But generally, they all follow kind of the same guidelines when it comes to being a settlement. It needs to be kind of sustainable for its people living there. Right? We all know how nights, right? Cyberpunk, as in the name, has maybe some issues that it's not sustainable for all. We all know that many cities have slums where it's actually not really that sustainable for people to live.
Yeah, but one quick thing right there is I would like to add something to the settlement, that it is not just a temporarily built thing, but more of a permanent situation.
Yeah.
Just a campsite with a few tents, I wouldn't define as a settlement. It can lead to a settlement, but it isn't right now. That's just something I would like to add.
I would say to go on that, I think it counts more as to what the intention of the people living there is, to settle here or to move on from here. But even a camp settlement can be a settlement if it's just them. If you ever think about how long it fucking takes to build an actual house, those things don't spring out overnight. It takes a long time to build even a small village. So that definitely is part of that, right? Even if people are living in just tents, that's still a settlement. Do you plan on living here at this place? And here at that place is something we will talk about in a bit, because that is one of the first major decisions. But first, let's talk about, Niels, I mean, it sounds weird as a question, I know, but I think everyone can think about something, but what are settlements good for?
Well, they give people a place to stay, more or less safe.
Yeah.
They give people a social hub for them to interact with other people. Mm-hmm. As you said, we are social creatures after all, so we need social interaction in every part of our life.
Yeah.
And this is what cities or settlements can do very well, because you clump together as a bigger group, however big the group might be. It can distribute the workload more evenly sometimes, because you have more people to do stuff. So people can specialize particular things.
Yeah.
So not you as a person living by yourself, you have to do everything. Gather food, gather everything, building stuff. But in a city or a settlement in general, you don't have to do that, because you can specialize in gathering food while another is building your house, and then trade again with the social interactions. And of course, provide a bit of safety, because safety in numbers is a big thing in nature. And so is it for humans or humanoids in general. And political influence.
Obviously, yes.
Regarding where the settlement is placed, where we come to in a bit. So yeah, I think that more or less summarizes it.
I think there's a lot of good points to go over that, right? It's a natural decision from us creatures to stay together. Again, safety in numbers is one of the most basic instincts in that, but also being social, right? And living together. All of that comes together. And that's why settlements have been formed, because people realized from way before we even recorded that the settlement existed, people had to have existed. No, yeah, I think that are a lot of good points of why settlements exist, or what settlements are good for, right? They basically are providing more or less every basic need you want. They are the places people go because they are safe there. They have food, they have water, they have work, they have the social interaction with others. They have everything the basic human or basic creature needs. But okay, we talked about what a settlement is for us for this episode. We talked about what they are kind of good for the creatures in the game. I want to talk about a bit about what are they good for outside when we play the game, right? We often talk about this, that when you do something in your games, it should have a certain effect outside the game as well, right? Having this big boss fight is obviously in the game, but out of the game, it's supposed to have this big, grand, epic closure feeling. At the same time, having a double crossing is in-game having a big impact, but out of game, it should have the players being shocked, or somewhat shocked at least, right? It should have been kind of noticeable, kind of not, but it should have the shocking effect outside the game as well. And what is there has to be something for cities as well. Why do we play settlements in our games? To have an out of game effect, or effect for our players. What is that? How does that effect look? And what are the effects we kind of want?
Most of the time, for me at least, is to wind down a bit, depending on what type of game you are playing. If it's an urban if it's an urban campaign, that changes things, but that changes the whole scheme of the campaign or theme of the campaign. So
yeah,
in general, winding down and having something to relate back to. Some of felt safe haven, where you're not really in danger, like we talked about what settlements are good for.
The safety thing, right? It's
exactly.
It's still a safety thing, yeah.
And a way for players to interact with through their characters with other NPCs or other players or factions or whatever. Just a way to have social encounters and not be on the edge all the time.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the time it's about the safety thing. It's okay, you're in the city now, you can sleep in an actual tavern, you're kind of safe, and then we can play with that. Maybe the players are in the village and the village gets attacked at night. So destroying that safety that they had before, which can be a very interesting thing to play with. Or at the same time, just let them have the night's rest before they have to go on their way again outside. But yeah, as you said, also there's the social interaction part of players can interact, because sometimes when they're out on adventures, the only people they have to interact with are the other player characters. And something that happens if you have only your player characters interacting with each other, it also tends to become a little less about roleplay. I'm not saying that roleplay stops at all. I'm just saying that if only players are talking to each other, they have this feeling of, well, we can also just discuss more on this one above meta level. I have exhaustion, basically. Can we take a rest? While others might still go, hey guys, I'm so exhausted. Can we please stop? Right? There's a difference in that. One is more roleplay, the one is more on the meta level, but it's still roleplay, right? If you only have your players interacting with each other, it can lead lead to that. It's not that it's bad at all, but if they're interacting with NPCs, they kind of have to, because they realize they're interacting kind of with the game interface now, with you again, right? But on a role-playing level. At least that's what I noticed, that my players often tend to get a little bit more technical in their terminology when they are alone outside in the woods in their adventures than when they are in cities, where it doesn't need to be technical, right? They do not need to worry about food because there's a food stall 2 streets down.
Exactly.
They do not need to worry about sleep because there's a tavern 3 streets down. And you don't need to worry about safety because there's big walls around the city and there's a city guard patrolling the area. So they're not that much on edge, like you said, but that also goes for the players, right? As you said, right? It goes for the players as well. I also think that settlements are a good way to begin and end quests, right? The good old, you start in a tavern, right? Yep. I know people hate it. People do not like this type of style to start a game because it's boring, yes, but at the same time, it makes sense. Yeah. Cities is where adventures start because the outside of the city is, in quotation marks, scarier, more dangerous, unknown. And that's why in a city where that isn't the case, or not the case that much, it's a good way to start that campaign. And taverns are just the natural meeting place for people, right? Yeah. That's why that is tested. But that's why generally starting campaigns or starting arcs or city arcs in a city is so great, because they give a lot of ways outside, figuratively and literally in the city gates or in the way the roads lead away from the city.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a other thing that here what cities can do on a meta level for your game is to show the difference between a densely populated area and, for example, the woods, or in general nature or dungeons or whatever, on a social level with the interactions and stuff, and also on a safety level and on an environmental level and on an emotional level even. Because if you're always alone, just with your party alone in the woods, it has a different emotional impact on you than staying in the city for a week or two, having some downtime and enjoying the life, while then after that proceeding to do the quest outside the city walls alone again, and then coming back after a week or two again and having that complete disparity between loneliness in quotation marks and the overfilled city area.
I think that's very, very interesting, because I don't know who else does this. Maybe you do, maybe you not. I know some people on Twitter do, because I talked about it there, I think 2 times already. Is information in general is super heavily important in my games. I love it, dropping my players hints to things that will happen in a month in game time. Yeah. And cities are the best way to do that for me in many ways, because first of all, when my players are outside in the woods doing whatever quest, the woods is filled with spiders, please kill the spider queen, whatever, and they're out for 2 weeks or 3 weeks straight in the woods. Do you know how long 3 weeks are? I don't know what happened 3 weeks ago in my life. And there's a lot of things that's happening, especially if you expand on that, not just a single person, but a whole city, a whole country, the whole world. I mean, every time my players go back to the big city, and there has been, for example, my players right now, let's take this as an example. My players are on their way back to the big city, kind of their hub city, right? They always come back here to rest, to stock up on gear or whatever. And they just finished an adventure in the high north. They've been away for 3 weeks now. They come back probably another week or so 4 weeks, a full month away. Is like they've been away a full month. There's gonna be some changes, be that in people, be that in politics, be that in economy, be that in whatever. But if my players come back, I am gonna make a big effort in handing them in some way or another a newspaper, because the city has a newspaper, right? And there's gonna be information on there about the war that's going on right now in the neighboring country, about maybe even what they did, because they changed a bit about the geography of this continent with what they did. And there's some stuff, right, that's going on. And giving them that information, right, is majorly important for me through that newspaper. And they don't get that outside the city. Inside the city, they can learn, they can understand what is happening. You can show them the impact of what they did very well through information, people talking, right? Because information travels along a network, and that network is just the roads of your world, basically. The infrastructure of your world is where the messages mostly travel. Through people overhearing something and then going to the next village, through messengers that ride to the next king or queen to get them a letter from the other one. But that's where information travels, and cities are the natural hubs for information as well. So those are the places where your players are gonna learn about new things. This is where the place where players learn about impacts of certain things, right? My players, for example, left a plot unfinished, or not unfinished, but said they weren't interested in a plot about bandits in the country. That plot has advanced. Maybe the bandits won. Maybe the queen and her army won. Who knows? But the players are gonna find out through that newspaper. They wouldn't be able to find out on the road. Sure, they could ask someone, but in the city, there's that condensed information. And information is a lot because players basically just go off of information. Information is the major way your players can engage with the game, or how they know how to engage with the game, more or less, right? We know the war on the West Front is coming to a close. That means we could go west now for our next adventure because the border might be opening again. That only works if our players know that, and they don't know that if they just spent the entire time in the woods. That's what settlements are good for as well. The information your players get.
Exactly. And I think we talked at length now about what settlements can do well for your game and for your players. But let's talk a bit more about how to create settlements. What you should pay attention to, or where to look first. So where do you usually look first when you create a settlement?
So when I create a settlement, the first thing you always need to look. I always look for that first, and you should and probably need to as well. It's the geography of the land the settlement is placed in.
Oh yeah.
Now, obviously, we are creating a settlement for a game, for fun. So you do not have to have a degree in city planning for this. You do not need to know if the place you want your city to be placed at is geographically the perfect place for it. That's not it. It doesn't matter necessarily where the city is placed, really. As long as you make at least some basic notions in your head that you know their city is actually sustainable. The goal of this is to make the city feel like a breathable, lived-in, actual place. And for that, you need geography.
Yeah.
And with that is, most importantly, the access to water. If your settlement does not have access to water, it cannot survive.
Exactly.
And that is either it's on a river or next to a river or a lake, or has enough groundwater to sustain its people.
Or a way to clear ocean water of the salt or whatever.
If we talk in fantasy, those three, river, lake, or groundwater, are the three main ways for settlements, because most of the time they didn't have a way to clear ocean water from salt. Maybe your city has a lot of priests in it, right? One of the things is when you think about world building and think about the effects of magic, a cleric can cast purify drink
food and water,
water or something this many times a day. And now you can think about how much water does the settlement need, or even create food and water. That's also a spell that they can cast. Maybe they are actually able to build a city in a desert where there isn't any water access. It's simple. A small settlement could live off of 3 clerics casting create food and water, 3 times every day, and they could sustain maybe 50 people that way. Maybe they have animals that can give milk as well, right? And then you have also another way of hydration, but you also need still water. But suddenly you have the possibility to defy the normal way of settlement creation, because magic is a thing, or science is a thing.
I did that in my homebrew world, where there's a country on basically the whole country is a desert, and some rivers flow through that, and most of the settlements are settled on the river. And they usually and naturally become the biggest, because you don't have to have that many clerics, priests, whatever, to create enough water for everyone. But there are small little trading posts, or smaller villages on a mountain range, or in the middle of the fucking desert, because there's the ability for people to create food and water out of the fucking blue. So I really love that, playing with the ways the game or the abilities the game gives you to kind of not destroy but bend the rules of city building or city planning, kind of, to make it work for your game.
Right, the rule is still, the people still need water, but the ways you can get water are changed, advanced. If you go that thought process further, you realize how fucked up the cleric's life must be. Because it's not, right, there are many ways this can resolve, but if that cleric isn't there, the people die. And the people don't want that. So maybe they lock up the clerics in a prison and force them to create their water. Because if that cleric runs away, we are all fucked.
Exactly.
So we need to protect our water source. That's one way. Maybe the cleric is revered as a hero, right? That's another way. But being the only source of water, people will kill for you.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a fucked up lie.
Yeah. So it is.
So it's definitely something to think about if you think about that. But right, if it's a normal lake, hey, who cares? But another thing about geography is obviously the access to water, access to food. Right? People need something to eat. Be that they have farmland for their animals, be that they have farmland for their crops, be that they have enough woodland around them so they can actually just accumulate mushrooms, herbs, roots, and berries.
Yeah, away for fishing or
away for
whatever
fishing,
things.
Right? They need some way to gather food and enough food to survive, right? One of the fun things is if you want a settlement to just exist, you just need enough resources so that people can survive. If you want a settlement to be big and expanding, you need enough resources so the people can live.
Yeah.
You need more. You need to have the capacity for more, right? If this well that your settlement has can sustain 100 people a day, or 100 people in the settlement, and your settlement has 110 people, there's a 10 people difference in that. And that either 10 people do not have access to water, or all people have access to 9% less water a day.
Yeah. This can go on for several days, but not forever. There is a timer on that settlement now.
Yeah. And how they do that is everyone's guess. Maybe they make the well deeper and therefore hold more water for them. I don't know if that actually works. I have no idea. I have no idea how wells really work. I know they bring water from the ground up, but that's all I know. Just let's assume that they can actually expand on the well. Maybe they do that. Maybe they don't. Maybe 10 people have to go. Or they find another way of water or any kind of sustainable drinking fluid, right?
Yeah.
Maybe those 10 people have a plan to start herding a small herd of cows in nearby vicinity. They don't produce water and they consume a lot of water, but maybe they produce enough milk so the people do not have to drink only water.
Yeah.
So they need water more for cleaning and for the animals instead of actually drinking it.
Yeah, or there might be a fruit plantation or anything that they usually used for eating the fruit, but now they are pressing the fruit out for the juice. And now you have another way of creating drinkable fluids.
I think we are basically on the cusp of talking about the next point of what you need to pay attention for when you create a city. And also, these things are not necessarily in order. I think geography at first was important because that's what you always need to think about. Access to water, access to food, maybe also access to roads.
Yeah.
If you have an established country already, people will settle where there are roads already established because it makes it easy to be part of the economy of the country.
Exactly.
The economy of the world around you. Because you need a way to fucking make money. You need a way to fucking live. Sure, maybe your fantasy world doesn't even have currency or money at all. But then still everything works by trade. And that's still economy.
Oh yeah, it is.
You still need something to trade. And that's what you need to think about as well when you create a city. Is that city one that produces a lot of this? Does the city produce this? What does the city not produce at all? How does the city, for example, if we talk about a capitalistic world, which most fantasy worlds are, how does the city make money? Does it sell stuff? Does it buy stuff and refines it? How does it work? You need to think about that. Again, it doesn't have to be that precise because most of your players do not have a degree in economy. Most of your players do not have a degree in economy. They don't fucking care if the coal mine next to the city actually should be sustaining the city with enough money to live or to pay the taxes.
As long as there's a rough idea, it's usually completely fine.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah, so same with the geography. You don't have to be a geography major or anything. Just have a rough idea where people get their basic needs. And then for the economy, have a rough idea where the people get their wares or what wares they produce. Just a general direction, not just the capacity and stuff that might lead too far.
Yeah, 100% true. I say very simply, when you think about economy, I mean, some other people are better than this, than others. I'm better at other things than others, so it all works out fine. Some people know economy and know how you should do this. What I do is very simple. I think about at least one major export and one major import for this town. Because that makes them part of an economy. They sell stuff, they buy stuff. And what they import is whatever does the city do not have. So do they import food? Okay, so they do not have a lot of farmland or not enough food. They export a lot of minerals. So they're probably a mining town. All I need to know. I already know something. And obviously that works with the geography. Maybe you wanted to start with economy. Works fine. You know the city has an export for a lot of minerals and imports a lot of food. So what is the city? It's probably a mining city. So it probably is in the mountains. So maybe it has a small river that just sprung from
somewhere up there.
From a source 300 meters uphill or something. But it's a mining town. So it probably is more or less in the mountains. It has maybe access to one road. It is very rocky. The buildings are more placed along where it actually works instead of a planned topography or something. But boom, you already have these two things. You already have a rough idea of this town. I think that is the basic thing you need for me.
Yeah.
Because economy and geography already influence a lot of other things. And if I really have to throw a town together, those are the two I always think about. Because those are the first two I really need that kind of make it noticeable. Because, right, it's a mining town. It's very different from a farm town.
Oh, yeah.
Those look so different from each other. Because they have to.
Yeah, and those two things basically influence every other thing that a city needs, or a city is, or what you should think about when you create a city. Yeah. For example, economy and geography. Where the city is placed heavily influences the politics of the city. Yeah. Who is in charge? Why are they in charge? Or why is the city placed exactly there, even though it might not be the perfect geographical space? Because the economy might be even better, and that furthers political influence and all of that. And politics is another way another thing that you should think about when you create a city. Who is in charge in the fucking city? Who runs the city? Is it a council of elders, or is it just a mayor or a governor, or is it the queen or king, the emperor of the whole country is in that city or settlement or whatever? This is something to think about because that has implications on the way the city is run and the city is planned and who lives there. Yeah.
I also think when you think about politics, it kind of nails down for you the idea of how big is the city and all, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because if you say who's in charge? Oh, it's a village elder. So this city is probably not big enough to run elections for mayor. They just say the oldest person, the one that has lived the longest in the village, knows probably what's best for the village. So we let them decide, or we let them be the one that's kind of in charge. That probably means that the city maybe has 100 or less people, because running an election for less than 100 people is really pointless, because everyone talks to everyone knows everyone, and they all know who's the favorite, and no one wants to run against the favorite, really. So it doesn't really work. It gives you some idea of scale, right? If the city has a mayor, maybe you do that differently, right? Maybe you say, okay, the city should be big, so it definitely needs to have a mayor. Works as well, right? But those two things have a heavy influence on each other, or that work together. Size and politics of the city internally, right? Not even talking about external politics, just the internal politics of the city. Who is in charge gives a lot of idea about the city in general, in my opinion.
And for example, if your city has a governor, it means there's some sort of overarching political structure in this country. It's not a autonomous city per se. It is part of a bigger country setting, because the governor is
he's been put in place by a higher government.
Exactly. And they can make decisions for that city, but not for the whole country. That is up to the higher rank in this political order.
Yeah. And they have to abide by the other decisions, right?
Exactly.
Can be that that when you want to create a city that somewhat feels interesting to your players, maybe they have a governor that has just decreed something that the citizens of the city do not want. Higher taxes, for example. And already that alone is a thing about politics. This governor doesn't have a choice. They were told, your city needs to pay higher taxes. They told their people, the people do not like it. 3 ways their plan to think about very little politics that can span a very interesting campaign idea or arc idea or adventure idea for your players. Maybe your players are like my players and want to solve problems of social injustice a lot. So they will take on that problem of figuring out why the taxes have been hired and finding a way how the people either can pay the taxes, which is the less favorable option by my players, or make sure they do not pay higher taxes. And that could be a thing. But it's a very simple thing about politics. It's this 3-step plan. The city has a governor, so it has an overarching government that makes decisions that might not be favorable for the people. Boom. Interesting politics side already taken care of.
Exactly.
Don't need to think about that anymore. And one thing I wanted to say, also, if the city is very huge, I'm talking about metropolis things, right? The city is huge. There live 1 million people here. Governing 1 million people is fucking hard.
Oh, yeah.
Because you cannot pay attention to all of them. What you do in that case is district governors or district mayors. Something Berlin does, for example. Every district of Berlin has a single mayor. And they are concerned with the issues of only their district. And each district has different issues, right? I live in a different district than Niels. And we have different mayors. We have different elected officials in the government for us.
And that leads to different types of politics. politics in each district.
Yeah, but obviously they all still work together when you think about the larger city, because we still have a city government. But that city government has divided and conquered the city. Conquered is maybe a little bit hard as a word here, but works still fine. Yeah. But they divided and conquered, so to make sure that they can actually more or less take care. We all know that today's times politicians are not interested in us normal people. Fuck politics, but...
Yeah, and I think in general, the bigger the city or the settlement gets, the more of a governing apparatus as a whole the city or the settlement needs.
Yeah.
Because in a 100 people village, you don't need that many tax collectors or judges or whatever, because it can all be handled by a pretty small group of people or even one person.
Yeah.
Because there aren't that many people to take care of. But the larger the number of people get, the more people you need to help govern those people.
Yeah.
So you need a complete standalone judicial system sometimes for bigger cities, because the governors or the mayors of the districts can't take care of it because they have so much else on their fucking plate that they have to do and that they have to think about. So bigger apparatus or bigger city means usually a bigger governing apparatus in general.
Yeah, okay. I agree 100%, right? It's just, again, baseline stuff you need. If you are very interested in making complex politics, do that. If you are not that interested in politics for your fantasy or sci-fi game, don't do that. Think about basic strokes and you have what you need, right? One other tip I would say is we have a few things to go through after this right now, but for all these things that we go through, pick one and focus on that and make the others baseline. Because that is a good way where we have geography, economy, politics. We still have others to go through, but if you take one of these 7 things that we have written down here and focus on them, that is already a good baseline. And then the other 6 you can make rather basic, rather simple, but still need to put some thoughts into, but not that much. Because if you have one of these 7 things really thought out, the other things kind of spin from that, because they're also heavily influencing each other. And it's again, one of these things where you can start from any point, because it's fucking your world, it's fucking your game. No one cares if you actually start with geography. In real world, we have to start with geography. And that's why starting with geography might be the best way. And I would agree that geography is the best way, that I have created my best cities yet. But it doesn't have to be if you're not that interested in geography. You can make a mining town without having first defined that it's in the mountains. And then say, well, it's a mining town, it's a small mining town, it needs to be in the mountains. Then it's in the mountains. That is still the thought you can make. So, after politics, we have written down demographics. So, Niels, why do you need to think about demographics?
Because it's the population of the city or the settlement.
Yeah.
The demographics show what people live there. And this implies why the other things imply why they live there or how they live there. And who in general as population groups live there, and the social hierarchy, if there is any. Regarding where you start, the city building process, everything influences the others. And this is the same with demographics.
Yeah, with the fantasy games, D&D, Pathfinder, whatever, lineages obviously influence that as well, right?
Yeah.
Is it a city of dragonborns or a city of humans? Is it a city of elves? Is it a city of dwarves? And I'm not talking about the stereotypes that elves live in tree houses and dwarves need to live under the mountains. I'm talking about that these people will build different towns for themselves. Dwarves are smaller. Their city is designed for dwarves. The buildings probably are not that high because their ceilings are lowered. Might not be lowered to an exact height for them, but if I look around in my room I'm sitting in right now recording, I have a 3.5 meter high ceiling. A dwarf doesn't need that.
Nope.
But an elf or a human might.
Exactly.
Because it's roughly double my height. For dwarf, that's nearly triple their height. Maybe even 3.5 their height.
Exactly.
And they do not need the highest self because they can't even fucking reach there. They would need an actual ladder to get up there. So they would build a different town than elves or humans would. Dragonborns might be a little bit broader as people, right? They might have broader shoulders. They are scaly, right? For example, if you have a population of red and gold dragonborns, they have heat resistance. They are resisted or even, I think, immune to fire now with changes thanks to fistbands or whatever. At least for some time. They might build in hotter areas.
Oh, yeah.
Because they can as people. They are allowed to because, well, well, their natural biology says they can.
Yeah, or regarding that, coming back to the underwater cities, for example, a population of people being able to breathe underwater and live there might build a city under the fucking water because they can.
Yeah.
And they have access to other different things, minerals or food, or water isn't a topic underwater. So yeah, changes different things depending on who lives in the city. And for example, just the looks of the city are heavily influenced by the people living there. Just by the way people decorate their homes inside or outside, or build their houses, or how many different lineages, for example, in D&D are living in one city. And this kind of shows again the differences between the city inside the city, the different districts, and the city out with other cities, or even the nature.
Yeah, right. What we talked about so far are we talked about places for commerce, for living now with the demographics. We talked about kind of ruling with politics. So there's 1/4 part of town that is different from the other 3. And those are roughly the 4 sections of how a town works. People living, commerce, ruling, and ceremonies, cultures, or whatever, right? People need recreational spaces.
Exactly.
Be it a bowling alley, be it a tavern, be it whatever. Some place they can relax, enjoy, and maybe and obviously have fun. For example, a theater district, a culture district, places where you have theaters or whatever other things, gladiatorial arenas, and I don't know, jousting competitions or whatever, right?
Yeah, or a temple district.
Or a temple district, right? Culture and religion, where you can have ceremonies, recreation,
spiritual guidance,
all of those things. That's important for people as well.
Yeah.
That's a good thing in and of itself. That's why a lot of places, if they are big enough, will have probably a church, a chapel, a temple, or whatever, because it's a place for people to come together, to show communal strength and faith. And
exactly.
That's in and of itself a good thing. Okay, but yeah, culture, theaters as well, arenas. All of these places give that feeling of community and culture and being part of recreational activities, having fun with friends. People need that. Kids can do that on a playground, in the streets, or even on a field where there's nothing. Kids can have fun. Adults as well. But also people sometimes kind of crave like more focused fun and recreational activities. Going to a theater. You go to the theater as only for the fact to enjoy this piece of art someone's created or something.
Exactly.
Not to just, let's meet up on the hill and do something.
And another thing that makes this kind of communal thing work is the history of the city or the settlement itself. Yeah. Because it can make the people that live there feel part of the bigger picture. Yeah. Because if you live in a very old city that has stood the test of time multiple times, was attacked by different things and still survived, and is now this prestige-heavy city, this can fill some people with a sense of honor to be able to live there. And this shows, or can show, through different buildings, architectural things in the city, or the topographic or whatever, or the demographic, with walls, defenses, forts, or just some ancient ruins that might be now a cultural park, coming back to the culture part.
Yeah, I fully agree, right? If your city has been attacked a few times already, they're probably gonna build a wall because they know that that's the best way to defend against something like that. Maybe there's an old or new fort outside. Probably the guard barracks might be a little bit more fortified because the guards need to be more on edge for attackers. Thinking about the history of a place is a lot interesting as well, right? Maybe the city had, for example, one of my cities in my fantasy setting has been ripped to the Feywild once. A big part of town got destroyed. Some parts survived. For example, what is now the upper district of town survived that ripping into the Feywild. And when it was placed again in the material world, it got placed off. It wasn't where it was supposed to be. It was kind of placed in a different angle and in a different location. Still at the lake where the settlement was, but completely shifted in many ways. So that's why that part of town kind of looks different. And they closed that part of town off against everyone to make sure, because there are still old rifts more or less in that part of town, not everyone wanders in and kind of harnesses that fairy energy that lives there or that resides in that town. That's part of the history. And that's an interesting part of history. And that's an interesting fact that changes the way the city works. works.
Yeah, as another example, when a city is really, really old and was built around ancient temples of another civilization that fell down or developed into the civilization that is living there right now, you might still see the buildings that once stood there. For example, think about the city of Rome in Italy. It is completely filled with ancient buildings that were once from the Roman Empire or every other civilization that lived there once. And it's all part of one city now. And it is part of that city's history and leads to contributes to the cultural parts of the city. And the same thing can be done to fantasy settings in your world when you want to think about the history part or the lore part of your city, just as an example.
Yeah, I agree 100%. One last thing that we actually need to talk about is planning. City planning is also one of the things that you kind of need to think about, even as simple as, has the city kind of been planned? Yes or no? Because if you say no, a lot of medieval cities have been built by Bob builds his house, Jim builds his house next to Bob, and then when Jerry wants to build his house, the road to Jerry's house needs to go around Jim's house in some way, shape, or form. And that's how you get these crooked roads, these buildings kind of placed not at an angle to each other, but just somewhere next to each other, because that's just how people build. And the more this becomes a city, the more the people realize that this is going to be a trade hub, be a major defense against, I don't know, another country, be important in an economic way or whatever. People are going to start planning how to build the town. Roads will become more straight. Marketplaces will be placed at specific points. If the city maybe has a great access to groundwater, they will place wells at specific points in the city where a lot of people can access them. They will place their cultural, recreational places at a specific place to make sure that everyone has access to them, or that the people that should have access to them will have access to them. They will place the marketplace in the middle of the town, so everyone can exit us in roughly the same time. Probably the ruler and their palace will be placed someplace where they are, first of all, safe, second of all, probably in some way still access to most of the city, and third, in a place where outside factions can reach them at the same time quick, and not quick because of safety, but quick as well because what if a delegation from a different country comes? They need to be brought to the palace immediately, right?
Exactly.
And that is planning. And that has a big impact on this town. Maybe the planning was to make the roads crooked in the first place, because then you have more place to place trees or to place little parks and recreational areas, which might impact people as well. But planning is a fact that shouldn't go underestimated. One of the biggest parts of planning actually for me is sewage.
Oh yeah.
Because holy fucking shit, do people accumulate shit.
Exactly.
And I mean literal
shit. Yeah.
And if you do not have a sewage system in a big city, where does that go? If your answer is it gets wished away by a wizard every single day, hey, that works because it's a fantasy city. There is a spell for that, right?
Oh yeah.
Maybe the cities have been built this way that all the streets are kind of lowered. They have this sidewalk, and you have a wizard casting just tidal wave into that city, into that street every day at a certain time of day where the streets are closed, and all the shit gets flushed out away. Maybe that's what you did. That works. First of all, that's fucking cool.
True.
Second of all, not all cities will have that. So there needs to be some way to deal with the shit and litter of the city even, right? Be it a sewage system. But then where does that sewage system lead? You can't have an infinite storage of sewage. Maybe they have infinite storage because they send it all to a different pocket dimension. That works as well. But maybe they also just flush it out into the river.
Maybe.
But then how do they keep the river clean? Maybe they don't, but maybe they do. But this is one big part of planning, because if a city wasn't planned and just developed, it will not have a sewage system, because no one starts a city with, we need to think about the shit before we build our houses, Jimmy.
Exactly. They build their houses and shit, and then, oh wait, what do we do with
Jimmy
shit?
is gonna say, but Dad, why do we need to worry about shit? Well, because it's shit.
Exactly.
Right? No one's gonna start with thinking, oh, what do I do with my shit? They're gonna think, I need fucking food, water, and a roof over my head. I can worry about shit after I do that.
Exactly. Worrying about shit is not a basic human need.
Well, hygiene is a basic human need.
Hygiene is, but you don't necessarily need to think about a sewage system when you can just shit in the woods.
Yeah.
But it's still a
that's
thing.
Still hygiene. You'd separate the place place where you shit from the place where you eat. That's hygiene.
Exactly.
And if you're a little hamlet with just 20 people living there and a few fields around you, you can literally say we accumulate our shit to make our own fertilizer. Hey, that's the way to deal with shit.
Exactly.
We don't care. It works.
But it's still a thing you need to think about when thinking about building cities.
It's still a thing you need to think about. And even if your settlement is bigger, especially if they're a big city or a metropolis or something, they need to worry about their fucking shit.
Oh yeah, because there will be a fucking shit ton, quite literally.
And they can't flush it out into the lake next to them because they need that lake for fishing, for maybe trading. If there's a river, there must be a river attached, or most of the time there's a river attached, but they need to think about that. And if you do not think about that, that's gonna be one of the questions. But that's a simple question to answer because really, there's a lot of ways you can deal with shit. The problem is just if you do not deal with it.
Exactly.
And that's the problem you need to think about. How do they do it? The answer to that can be a lot of different things. And all of them are valid, because we're playing a fucking game again. My city doesn't have to be perfect and actually work. Again, it doesn't have to. It should at least be basic realism, but I'm not a city planner. I do not want to spend 15 hours of my week to think about how my actual city works. I want to spend 1 hour before my sessions thinking about, okay, how does the city deal with shit? How is it protected? What does it import and export? And who rules the city? And where does the city actually exist? And then I have done enough, because my players have this buy-in. They know even if they think there's some things about the city that are off, they're not going to be the ones that point that out. They're not going to do that dick move because they know it's just for fun.
Exactly. If this thing that is off isn't affecting the story or the players directly in a major way, they usually just don't fucking care.
Yeah, they won't probably notice because you're the one that's overcritical of yourself. They won't notice. They think, oh, cool, a new city, I can do shopping. That's all they care about.
Exactly. For example, they won't care if there's only one marketplace for food in a city that it would usually be too big. As long as there's a fucking marketplace where they can get their bread in the morning, they don't care. They walk there and just buy the fucking bread and don't worry, oh wait, but with this many people living in the city, wouldn't it make actually more sense to build another marketplace? And what is this for an unrealistic city? They don't care. They need the basic needs that the citizens in the city need as well. And the rest, it's just flavor.
Yeah. So, one last thing. We've talked about the things you need to think about, or the things you should ask yourself. We talked about a good advice that it's not about perfect accuracy, but just a living place. I think adding some incentive to explore obviously works great, because at the end of the day, we're playing a game that is about adventuring, exploring, and having fun in a fantasy world or in a sci-fi world or whatever world. So some incentive for your players to actually engage with the city is important, but that can be through any kind of way. Maybe it has a problem with its shit right now. Maybe that's a fun first adventure for your players to deal with this shit. Or maybe that's a fun first adventure for your players to deal with the shit of this town.
Exactly.
But one other thing, biggest advice I have for making a city good, and not just a city, is make major features and points of interests that stand out.
Oh yeah.
Right? One major feature for my town that I talked about here is that part of it got ripped to the fucking Feywild and came back with Fey energy in it. So buildings are cracked. There are certain Fey portals still in the city that are not necessarily open, but usable if you know how to open them. There's Fey energy. Plants start changing color randomly. Some plants might talk. That's an interesting feature. Another point of interest, for example, is the prayer square. Because when they planned their city, they said we make a specific district for religion. So there's a market square, more or less, where there are 12 churches, temples, and cathedrals around that market square for people to live out their faith in the gods of the setting. There are some temples outside of that, but most of them are located in one specific key area. That's a point of interest.
Or make memorable shops, places, taverns, like this one tavern that the Dancing Pony?
Dancing Unicorn.
The Dancing Unicorn.
One stop all for every adventurer, no matter where they come from.
Exactly. This is a way or a point of interest that makes the city unique and interesting, and makes the players want to visit that place, and in regards to that, the city more often. Yeah,
but it can also be smaller features. I think one of the funny features that I think isn't even really regarded by many as this big of a feature, but it's actually very cool, is Baldur's Gate and Faerun has a ban on horses and carriages inside the city.
Oh yeah.
Because the roads are too small for them. And that's an interesting feature. The roads are small, or the roads are crooked, small, and people need to go through, and you can't have a cart pushing through because that would plug up the system. That's cool. Even if it seems minor to many, it's actually really cool if you think about it, because where do my players store their horses? Where do they store their cart? It doesn't sound interesting, but I really find it interesting as a feature, because it makes the city look unique. El Turel has a fucking sun over over it for every single day. They do not have a fucking night cycle. Hello?
Exactly. And it doesn't even have to be that major of a thing, like you said, with the narrow streets in Baldur's Gate. Or another thing that I like to do is, or especially if you plan to make some interesting storylines or adventures in the city, give the city guilds or factions the players can interact with. Just a thing the players can interact with on a regular basis, not necessarily with the same NPCs all the time, but the same group of NPCs. Makes the city more memorable because they can build connections.
Yeah.
Physical connections, emotional connections, economical connections with the city itself as a living, breathing part and be part of that city, whether they like it or not. But
exactly,
they will be part of the city if they interact with something that acts inside the city, like a guild, a faction. The fucking city guard or whatever is still a faction. If they interact with the city guard in a good or bad way, they still will be connected with the city if they want to or not.
Yeah, I think you led to something very interesting with that for me, because on Twitter I made a thread about building my homebrew city, a map in Incarnate, and people chimed in with advice and all of that stuff. And one of the persons after is I've posted the finished map to the internet. A lot of people were very supportive, and it looks great to me, and a lot of people agree with that, which I find very charming. But one person said that they said my city looks very interesting to them because they can see a lot of places for stories to develop. And they point out a few things. Well, my city has docks, so maybe some story that involves the docks. And that sounds like, yeah, every city has that. Not really. Because what I think about when you have a city in your game is really important, like this person said, it should have stories in them. It should have an incentive for your players to live stories in them. It should be interesting, because in TTRPGs, not the set pieces are important, but the stories will live in those set pieces. If we talked in the environment episode about, right? Environment alone doesn't make the game interesting, but setting a good adventure in a specific environment makes a great adventure.
Oh yeah.
And that is the same thing here. This city is an environment. It has a lot of interesting places for my players to explore. This person pointed that out, and I loved that because it showed me that I made a good job of creating a good setting piece for my game, and not just a city map for people to use. I created a setting piece for my players to interact and live in. And that is the important part.
Exactly.
And you do that through the points of interest, but also through just interesting locations for great stories. Sitting on the docks at night and suddenly, I don't know, a sea creature comes out of the docks or out of the sea. Boom. Interesting story. Works. Perfect.
Or nothing that drastic can be done with the docks. You can sit there and there are just some minor lights somewhere in the background, somewhere on the open sea that you can only see from the docks, but from nowhere else. Why? Whatever. I don't know, because it's just an idea, but something like can be done. Or when you stand at a specific point in the city, you can see there is hanging a weird mist around the city, or whatever the fuck you want to do. Create things, places where stories can develop.
So yeah, I think we're done for today.
Yeah.
At least I do not have anything else to talk about. We talked a lot about stories and about cities and how to develop them and how to make them interesting. And again, the most important thing is making them interesting or engageable, is what I would say. So Niels, please send us off for today.
And as per usual, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DoubleDMPod, or you can visit our website at www.doubledm.com. We also have a Ko-Fi if you want to check that out. And if you like that show, please leave a like and review of... Why the fuck? Concentrate. And if you like the show, please leave a review on your favorite podcasting listening platform of your choice. And with that, thanks for listening. Hear you on the next one, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.